What's up?
My doctor told me no more donuts.
It's a bummer, man. It's a
I'm
shame.
having some super withdrawals.
I'll have a few for you, man.
I appreciate it.
Say, don't hang
I'm
around.
hurt. I am hurting.
Yeah, that's bad news, man.
It really is.
I
I
should,
just smell them now. I just smell them.
I should probably eat healthier so I can eat donuts longer, but it's not gonna happen. So anyway, all right. Well, anybody have any questions before we get started? Nothing. You guys all blow me up during the week, so there's no questions here. That's good. I actually appreciate that. So, so last week I think we left off. I think it's section 5. Does that sound, Jerry? I'm getting like a weird look from you.
I had to leave a few minutes earlier, but I thought you covered to 7.3.1.
You had
Well,
ahead.
Don't go,
Yeah.
I had to leave early, so don't go by mine.
Yeah, I think what we had done was we had talked about commission because it kind of ties into some sections up above.
Oh, right,
but
you were going, yes, you were.
Yeah, so I think we had skipped over so
Mhm.
5 and 6. That
Yep.
did we cover brokerage relationship section 4? Whoever was on last week, anybody? That sound right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. So we'll pick it up at section 5. So section 5 is where we find what are called the uniform duties. The reason they're called uniform duties is because they are duties that we owe to our clients, whether we are representing them as a transaction broker or a buyer's agent. And most of these duties fall under the umbrella of exercising reasonable skill and care for the buyer. And so that's what you'll see in section 5.1. It says broker must exercise reasonable skill and care for the buyer, including but not limited to these things. And then in section 5.2, those are things that we must not disclose. So we'll get to that. But as far as section 5.1 goes, these are things that are mostly born out of lawsuits. And so there's specific lawsuits that kind of apply to each one of these. And I'll give you some other fun examples. I know a lot of you guys have been in my classes before. You've probably heard some of these, but some new, it's not new to you, but if you're new to class, you might enjoy these. So 5.1.1 says that we have to perform the terms of any written or oral agreement with the buyer. So the tough part is, right, like, how do you prove what the terms of an oral agreement were? I don't know. I mean, it's hard unless there's some, form of documented evidence showing, hey, this is what we've agreed to. It's in writing, or I have it recorded, or, something like that. And so we have to be careful here. And I know a lot of you guys have heard the squirrel story before, but if you haven't heard the squirrel story, so when I was the employing broker at the Fort Collins office, one of our brokers who has since moved to a different state, she had a property up in Fort Collins Country Club. And the owner of that home was an elderly gal whose husband had passed away. And this gal had since moved to New York to live with her adult daughter because this elderly gal needed some additional care. And so she moved to New York to live with her daughter, and her daughter happened to be a real estate broker in New York. And so that kind of complicates things a little bit, which we'll talk about here. But what happened was, after this gal moved away, the pastor of her church had kind of agreed that he would check up on the property kind of regularly, right? Make sure that there weren't squatters living in there, make sure that the heat was on when it was cold, and all these other things, right? And so that actually that took place for a period of, like, I think it was about a year and a half, where this woman did not live there, but her pastor had kind of been checking up on the property and mowing the grass and whatever. Okay, well, finally it came time to sell the property, and our broker gets the listing. And one of the things that she had agreed to do was that after every showing, that she would go over there and make sure the property was secure, right? And because she knew it was vacant, she knew this elderly gal wasn't coming back from New York. And so she said, hey, yeah, I'll make sure that the property is all locked up and everything else, so that you don't have to worry about that. Well, so in the meantime, her pastor, was still kind of doing his thing. He was checking up on it as well. Our broker gets the property listed. There's a showing that takes place on, I think it was like a Friday, evening or something. And it wasn't our broker who showed the property. It was a buyer's broker at another brokerage, right? And there were multiple showings, and there was no way that our broker could get over there after every single showing to lock up the property and to check on the property and everything else, because they had back-to-back showings, and it's Friday night and our broker has a life and whatever. And so anyway, it turns out that one of the buyer's agents, and we don't know who it was, but one of them, while they were showing the property, either the broker or more than likely their clients, their potential buyer client, had opened the flue on the fireplace, presumably to see, the condition of the flue or whatever, right? And so in the meantime, they get done showing the property, and the buyer or the broker, whoever opened it, did not close that fireplace flue. Well, nobody was using the fireplace, but unfortunately there was no, mesh over the top of it. There was no, cap on there or anything else. And so what had happened was a bunch of squirrels had gotten inside the property down through the flue. And of course, this house is in Country Club, and so it was a relatively expensive home, and it had Pella windows. And if you know Pella windows are not cheap, right? Pella is like the Ferrari of windows. They're extremely expensive. And for whatever reason, the squirrels took a liking to the trim on the windows. And so these squirrels got in the property and they were chewing around the trim of the windows, these Pella windows, and the Pella sliding door. Okay. So our broker, showings happen over the weekend. Our broker goes over there on a Monday. So, after this supposed event happened, right? A couple days go by or whatever. She goes over there and she notices that there's squirrels in the property and they have chewed up all this trim around the windows and the sliding door that wasn't there before, right? And so she calls the seller and says, hey, you're probably gonna have to get this fixed. I don't know how squirrels got inside, right? But there's squirrels in your property. And so she does some searching and whatever, and she finds out that the flue is open. And so in the meantime, we get a call from this elderly woman's daughter, who, keep in mind, she's a real estate broker in New York. And I don't know if she was lying to us or if this is really the way it is. I have a hard time believing this, but the daughter said in New York, it's the listing broker's responsibility to maintain the property, effectively, is what she was saying. Now, I don't know whether that's true in New York or not, and we'll talk about it in regards to Colorado, but she's trying to threaten us, right? And say, hey, this is your fault. You're responsible for the maintenance of the property. My elderly mother has not lived there for a year and a half. We've never had this problem while the pastor's been taking care of the property. And now all of a sudden we list the property and there's squirrel damage, to the windows and doors. And so they sent us a bill for like $37,000 or $38,000 to replace these Pella windows and the sliding door. And so, we're going through this and we're talking to our broker and we're like, hey, what was the agreement? Show us your exclusive right to sell, which obviously we're talking about exclusive right to buy, but the same duty applies on the seller side, right? And so we're like, show us your exclusive right to sell, and let's see what's in there. Well, we look in there and there's nothing specifically written into the contract that says that our broker will have an obligation to go secure the property after every showing, right? And there's nothing in there that says that our broker is responsible for the maintenance of the property that's written into additional provisions. And so, what she tried to lean on was this clause right here that says you have a duty to perform the terms of any oral agreement. And we had an oral agreement. Okay. And there really was not a dispute about that. We talked to our broker and said, was that your oral agreement with the seller? And she said, yeah, it was my oral agreement that I would go and I would secure the property. Okay. So a couple things that are interesting. One, if we scroll down to 26, what section 26 says is that this agreement constitutes the entire contract between the parties, and any prior agreements, whether they were oral or written, have been merged and integrated into this buyer listing contract. Okay. Well, there was no, additional provision in this contract that mentioned anything about securing or maintaining the property. Okay. And so what we relied on was we said, hey, this is the agreement, right? And this constitutes the entire contract between the parties. And there was nothing that was merged into this agreement, because otherwise we would see it in writing, right? Now, let's forget about the fact that this clause exists within this contract, right? The other thing that we really have to rely on is, what would a reasonable person expect as to that type of an agreement, right? When you agreed to take on this additional duty of securing the property after every showing or whatever, right? What does that mean to you as an average person? I mean, what do you think our broker, right? What do you think her mindset was when she was agreeing to do this? What do you think she was agreeing to?
Locking the
Check it
doors
out
and
all.
Yeah, locking the doors and maybe stuff like checking windows, right? Like,
well, turning off lights too. That
Yeah.
would be my idea.
yeah, turning off lights, or maybe even leaving like the porch light on or something, right? Like, so making sure the lights are either on or off depending on what the agreement was, right? So I don't think any reasonable person, as they're making this agreement, goes, yeah, I'm also going to check the fireplace flue every time I'm over there to make sure that it's not open so that squirrels can get into the property, right? And so regardless of this clause, this clause in section 26, right, the average person, when they're making that agreement, they're not contemplating like, hey, I'm going to make sure that squirrels can't get into your property, right? And so fortunately, that particular issue ended up dying. We basically presented various sections of the contract to her, presented her with this reasonable person, which is a kind of a legal standard for these types of complaints and stuff. And so we presented her with all these things, and eventually she just went away. She tried to bring it back up from time to time, threatening errors and omissions insurance, suits and all these other things. And unfortunately, she just got sick of it, and she went away. So that didn't go anywhere. But moral of the story is, be careful, because we do have a duty to perform the terms of any oral agreement, right? And our broker probably satisfied that to the most part. I think the biggest issue is there were a series of showings from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and she didn't go check on them until Monday, right? And so really, if the buyer wanted to, they could have filed a real estate commission complaint, and that complaint potentially would have been successful because she violated, one of her duties as a transaction broker. However, a real estate commission complaint does nothing to help the seller recover their costs in this case, right? The real estate the real estate commission's jurisdiction is not to award civil penalties and damages and anything like that. Their jurisdiction ends at being able to fine us $2,500 per violation of real estate commission rules, right? And assigning us class work, downgrading our license, suspending or revoking our license, or whatever, right? So they can't issue a judgment that would say, hey, yeah, broker, you're responsible for paying this $37,000 bill. That they don't have the authority to do that. Okay. So be careful.
Hey, Jesse,
Yeah.
the attorneys that we used to use in the media business used to say, when you get off the phone and you agree upon something, send it in writing. In other words, quickly put it in writing and send it off. That way, you've covered your, what we used to call it CYA, but
Yeah. Yeah, and there's some pros and cons to that, right? I mean, obviously, if you're
That's
putting it
right.
in writing, like
That's right.
you're bound to it. So be careful. And that being said, I don't want you guys to try to skirt around the issue by making a bunch of oral promises and then not putting them in writing, right? And trying to woo the clients, with oral agreements and then skip out on them, right? So again, the moral of the story is do what you say you're going to do and just put it in writing in the contract, right? If that's what you've agreed to on the phone, then go ahead and put it in writing in the contract and then know that you're obligated to do it. Okay. So we have to perform the terms of any oral or written agreements with the buyer. We have to present all offers to and from the buyer in a timely manner, regardless of whether the buyer is already a party to a contract for the purchase of another property. So, this gets a little bit weird because if the buyer is already under contract on another property and they don't have the financial means to, purchase another property, but they call you up and they say, hey, Gary, yeah, I know we're under contract on 123 Main Street, but 456 Main Street came up and we would really like to put an offer on that property. Well, what are you supposed to do? You have to present all offers to and from the buyer in a timely manner, regardless of whether they're already under contract on something else, right? Well, the other piece says, if we jump down to 5.2, these are things that we must not disclose, right? We can't disclose any material information about the buyer unless disclosure is required by law, or failure to disclose such information would constitute fraud or dishonest dealing, right? Well, is that dishonest dealing if they're under contract on 123 and they can't afford to purchase two properties and now they want to go pursue 456?
Yes.
Is that dishonest dealing?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. And so it says we can't disclose this unless it would constitute dishonest dealing. And so in that case, we have to disclose adverse material facts about the buyer's financial situation, right? So what do? Now you have a client who wants you to go put in an offer on another property when they don't qualify for both. You have to disclose adverse material facts, including adverse material facts about the buyer's financial situation, right? And when you disclose that adverse material fact about their financial situation, what's going to happen to their earnest money on 123 Main Street?
Gone.
Gone. And they say, Gary, I don't want you to disclose that because I don't want to lose my earnest money. I want you to use an inspection deadline or our loan termination deadline to terminate the contract.
Can't do it.
Yeah, I say,
It's your
I'm
deal.
sorry, but I have a legal obligation to disclose this stuff. If I don't disclose it, I'm concealing adverse material facts, and that's a real estate commission rule violation, and my license can get punished, right? So if you don't want that to be disclosed, then what you got to do is go get your own legal advice. Okay? And if I have your attorney that you've paid for telling me not to disclose it, then I'll not disclose it, right? And then I have, I've got something to lean on if the real estate commission ever comes after me. If the sellers find out that you've done this, right, and they come after me, I've got a legal opinion from an attorney, right? And I'm going to dump it on them. And then they can defend that claim. Okay. Or really the conversation to be had should be, if you like 456 Main Street that much, then you need to be willing to walk away from your earnest money on 123. Is it
Right.
that
That's when
important
you
to
have
you?
that. Yeah. That's when you have that conversation.
Yeah. Is it that important for you to have 456 over 123? And if it's not, then we're going to move forward on 123. And if it is, then that's the cost of doing business, because that's what we've agreed to do. And you've agreed to operate in good faith, right? And this is not good faith. So your earnest money is at risk per the contract. If you wanted to violate the terms of the contract, you're going to be in default. Your penalty is, assuming you have not checked the specific performance box, which I don't ever want you to do, right? Assuming you've
Got
not
it,
checked
Jesse,
that.
we got it.
Assuming you've not checked that box, your
Never.
penalty is the earnest money, right? That's what you've agreed to. So put your money where your mouth is. Let's cancel the 1, 2, 3. We'll give up the earnest money and we'll go get the house that you really want, right? Kevin, you got a question?
Yeah, just to play devil's advocate, and not that I think this is a good idea, but let's say you were under contract and had an inspection done and you weren't to the resolution. You could, couldn't you still terminate based on inspection if the timeline was correct? Or is
So,
knowing what you know still bad faith?
well, good. So good question. And the answer is, would the buyer have terminated using their inspection had had 456 Main Street not popped up? Right? If they wouldn't have terminated it, had 456 Main Street not popped up, they're still dealing in bad faith, right? The only reason that they're trying to use that as their right to terminate is because there's now a property on the market that they like better. Now, that being said, does this stuff happen all the time? Right? Yes, it happens. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it doesn't, but the conversation needs to be, hey, if you wouldn't have terminated, other than for the fact that 456 Main Street popped up, right? Then you're dealing in bad faith. We can try to do this, but if the sellers make a claim on your earnest money, and if I get called into court, I have to tell the truth, right? Because otherwise you're committing perjury, which is not good. So I'm going to be telling the truth, right? So these are the terms of the contract that you've agreed to. If you don't want 1, 2, 3 Main Street and you like 456 that much, then fine, give up the earnest money if it's worth it to you. If it's not worth it to you, then just know your earnest money's at risk, right? And see what happens. Okay. But I always recommend that they get their own attorney's opinion if that's what they want to do. And very few of them will ever actually go get their own attorney, because now they're spending money, right, for an attorney to review a 20-page contract, all the addenda, disclosures, right? And how long do you think the attorney is going to take to do that? Well, they're going to take hours and hours to do that, which just eats into their earnest money. You might as well just cough up the earnest money in the first place, right? So, yeah, good question. Does it happen? Absolutely. Should it happen? Not in good faith, right?
So another question, Jesse, let's say your buyer was willing to do that. And how would you terminate?
Yeah,
Terminate the first deal.
If they're willing to give up their earnest money and just walk.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you just do a notice to terminate under the other box, right? You can put whatever you want in there. Buyer decided to pursue another property, send over the earnest money release, releasing all of the earnest money to the seller, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, there's not a box on the notice to terminate that says default, right? Yeah, I've decided to kill the deal because I'm in default. I like another property, so they probably they left that out for good reason, because we don't want that to happen. But yeah, I mean, you just send them over a notice to terminate and an earnest money release, sending the earnest money to the seller. So
And so that just ends it, Jesse? I mean, that's it?
yeah, I mean, yeah, because you're just gonna give written notice to the title company, right, that you're releasing the earnest money to the sellers. What is the seller going to fight you on?
Yeah, okay.
Right? If you have not checked specific performance, which again I don't want you to do, then your total damages are effectively the earnest money. Now, there's some other provisions in the contract, right? The damages clause, if the inspector falls through the roof and the buyer terminates the deal, then the buyer's still liable for that. Hopefully the inspector would cover it, but there's some other possible remedies that the seller has for those types of things. But if it's just due to buyer's default, right, the penalty for a buyer default is again, assuming no specific performance, it's liquidated damages, and that means your earnest money, right? So the deal's done. You don't have to have any resolution as to you know, hey, they haven't signed the earnest money release yet. Can I still go pursue this other property? Yeah, on the buyer side, if that's what the situation is, the buyer just said, yeah, I'm coughing up all my earnest money to the seller because I'm in default. You go pursue another property right away for all I care, right? The worst that could happen is the seller determines, yes, you were in default, and their remedy is your earnest money. Well, you've already given it to them, right? So you don't need to wait for that. The reverse is not true, right? If you're a seller and you're trying to fight for a buyer's earnest money, there's some different ramifications. Like, don't go put your property back under contract while you're in an earnest money dispute unless the closing date has already passed, right? But if the closing date has not passed and there's an earnest money dispute, the seller better not be taking another offer. So that's a different story for a different day. But yeah, on the buyer side, if the buyer is admitting to default and coughing up the earnest money, we can go put a property right back under contract before that earnest money release ever gets signed. Okay. This wording throws some people off because they're like, well, the buyer is the one who writes the offer, so we have to present all offers from the buyer. But what about to the buyer? Well, that's like a counter offer, right? A counter offer is an offer. And so if you get that counter offer, you need to do it in a timely manner. Well, what's a timely manner? Where is timely manner defined in this contract? Yeah, I don't know either, right? You know, really the best thing to do is just present it at your first reasonable opportunity to present it, right? Even if that just means, you know, hey, the buyers are working and I can't get a hold of them. If nothing else, at least send it to them and say, hey, you know, we received a counter offer. Call me when you have a few minutes. I've been trying to get a hold of you or whatever, right? Like, at least send it to them so that because the problem there is what happens if you get a counter, right? And you sit on it until, you know, the buyers are out of work for the day. And then in the meantime, the sellers get another offer that's better than yours. And they call you up and they say, hey, Harry, really sorry to do this to you. I know we got a counter out to you, but we're revoking our counter. We got another offer that the sellers would like to take. Well, geez, that sucks for your clients, right? So if nothing else, at least send it to them, you know, so there's some paper trail, something in writing saying, hey, I've sent it to you. Call me when you have a few minutes so we can review. And then if they choose not to call you until after they're out of work or whatever, it's not on you, right? 5.1.3, we have to disclose to buyer any adverse material facts that are actually known by the broker. Now, we're not in most cases going to know a lot of adverse material facts about the property, right? But if you knew that the foundation was junk and it had been covered up, right? And typically where this comes into play is where there's a broker who's representing the seller, right? Maybe initially as a seller's agent, okay? And then they pick up an unrepresented buyer. But in the meantime, they've talked to the seller and the seller says, hey, like, yeah, there's some foundation issues, but you know, we just had the drywall, the crack in the drywall. We just had it repaired last week. So hopefully that holds up long enough to get us through closing, right? Well, now all of a sudden you pick up an unrepresented buyer, right? Flipping to transaction brokerage. And you're like, hey, I really want this deal to go through. Now I'm working both sides of the deal. So I'm doubling up on the commission. Like, I'm not letting this deal fall apart, right? And you're putting your commission in front of your duties, right? And so you're like, yeah, we'll just see if the buyer happens to figure it out as far as their inspections go or whatever. And now you're concealing adverse material facts that you actually know, right? For the most part, you're not going to know any adverse material facts if you're out with a buyer showing properties that are listed by somebody else that you've never been in, you've never been to, right? Like, you're going to see what the buyers see at the inspection. And it's okay for you to call out an adverse material fact if you see something, but keep in mind, we're not an inspector either. And so there's a piece in the contract that we'll get to that says we have no duty to conduct an independent inspection of the property. So we'll get to that, but you do have to disclose any adverse material facts that you actually know about. You have to advise the buyer regarding the transaction. And so this is one of the, again, the big misconceptions is that people say, well, if I'm acting as a transaction broker, I can't advise the buyer what to do. Well, you have to advise the buyer what, regarding the transaction. Now, you can't cross the line of, being a buyer's agent, and you can't do these things, right? You're working as a neutral party to the transaction, but you have to advise the buyer as to how the transaction works, right? Hey, here's the dates and deadlines. Here's, how these deadlines play together, whatever, right? You have to advise them regarding the transaction. And if there's something that you're not an expert on, right? Tax implications, something like that, you have to advise them to obtain expert advice from somebody who specializes in that field. Okay. So you have to advise them whether you are a transaction broker or a buyer's agent. Okay. You have to account for any money or property received in a timely manner. Again, timely manner is not defined. That being said, at the first reasonable opportunity, bad idea to take property, guys. I don't want you to take somebody's wedding ring as, collateral for their down payment or something. That's just all bad every time. So, but if you're going to take the earnest money check, then make sure that when you drop it off at title or the brokerage firm that's holding the earnest money or whatever, make sure that you get an earnest money receipt, because that's somebody else's money that you now have. And really the best practice is just to tell the buyer to take the money to title themselves, right? I don't want to be the middleman as far as your money is concerned. Now, that being said, have I taken earnest money checks to title for the buyer before? 100%. Yep, I do it, and I do it fairly regularly, right? If we are up against a tight deadline or the buyer can't make it there before the alternative earnest money deadline because they work or whatever it is, will I do it? Yes, absolutely, I will do it. However, I'm for sure going to get an earnest money receipt when I take that money and I drop it off at the title company or the brokerage firm holding it. Okay. We have to keep the buyer fully informed regarding the transaction, right? And so, listing broker might call you up and say, hey, we're having some issues. We literally have a deal going on right now with one of our brokers where one of the sellers got arrested for domestic violence, right? And so there's questions as to whether or not this transaction is actually going to close on time, because the seller may still be in jail. He was on a mental health hold, and so was he even competent to sign a legal contract, right? There's some real questions about this stuff. And so let's just use that example. Listing broker calls you up and says, hey, Jerry, we don't know if this deal is going to close on time because the seller right now, he's in jail. He may be released on bond or something. He's on a mental health hold, right? We don't know if he's going to be deemed competent to sign a legal contract. We may have to extend closing, right? And you're like, well, let's cross that bridge when we get there, right? Well, not a good idea. I'd probably at least tell my buyer about it so that my buyer can start making some additional plans if needed to, find a hotel or change their truck rental dates or whatever it is, right? Even though it hasn't affected our transaction yet, it has the potential to affect the closing date or whatever. So, good idea to keep the buyer fully informed, even if it's something your buyer maybe doesn't want to hear, right? We all hate to be the bearer of bad news, but at the end of the day, we have a duty to keep them fully informed regarding the transaction.
But that contract's still valid. Just
Yeah,
because
the contract's still valid. Now, what you got to keep in mind is that our contract doesn't contemplate what happens if, this type of scenario were to come up. And so at the end of the day, right, the judge, if it came down to a lawsuit, which hopefully it wouldn't, but if it came down to a lawsuit, the judge kind of has some discretion because, there's some parts of our contract that could be loosely applied, but there's also some legal concepts that would contradict the terms that are written into our contract. And so, the judge would have to weigh all of those factors and take that into account. And there's really not a black and white as to what the judge's opinion might be as to what happens here. So, that's why we just need to keep the buyer fully informed and have them make contingency plans if they need it, right? So
let me just, I'm going to play devil's advocate here just real quick.
Yep.
So let's say that happens and
Yep.
they can't close on the date that they need to close. And that puts our buyers into a bind because they were going to get out of their house or they were going to get out of their apartment or whatever it is. They don't have any legal recourse back, do they?
The buyers?
Yes.
Well, potentially they could. Again, there's no black and white because our contract doesn't contemplate what happens in this case, right? And so if it had to be, again, the hope is that it doesn't ever go to court, right? And very few deals ever go to court. Like I get agents all the time who are like, whoa, this is so risky. Like, I don't think I want all this pressure of being a real estate agent. And guys, like, I give you the worst of the worst examples. I don't want you guys to think that like writing a contract means you're going to get sued, right? It's very seldom that ever actually happens. So the hope is that you're able to work it out. But if it did, if we weren't able to work it out and it did go to court, then the bottom line is there's some legal concepts that contradict some of the plain language of our contract. And so the judge would probably have some discretion as to what happens there. And so there is no black and white one size fits all answer for every, do the buyers have any recourse? Well, they might not, right? I mean, the seller really had no control over the situation. I mean, yeah, if it's DV, like, don't beat your wife. I mean, I don't know what to tell you, but that is a separate issue from our contract. And so the seller has no control over, hey, I couldn't get out of jail to sign the contract or whatever, right? So there's it's not a one size fits all answer is the bottom line.
Jesse, one of my first deals, it was a signable contract, but right before closing, and I was representing the buyers, the husband was put in jail. I didn't disclose that. Anyway, it was right before closing, but the title company took the papers to the jail and had him sign it. But I didn't even think about disclosing that to the seller.
Well, yeah, and it's,
but
yeah, and maybe, I mean,
reference.
if it's an assignable contract and there's still a way to get it complete, right? Then is there a legal obligation to disclose it? I mean, I would err on the side of caution and say you should disclose it. Obviously, in your case, it worked out, so it doesn't matter. And some of you guys know, I used to be a deputy at the Larimer County Jail, and so I've seen this before. And sometimes the attorneys will bring documents in. Sometimes notaries will come in to sign these documents and stuff. So it is possible, but there are certainly hurdles that might make it more difficult to get it done. So is it impossible? No. Is it something that should probably be disclosed? I mean, I think probably yes, because otherwise you're potentially concealing an adverse material fact regarding the transaction, the fact that it may not be able to close on time, right? So, good idea to disclose, but I would say, again, there's no one size fits all. It kind of depends on the situation, right? If the wife has power of attorney to sign and the husband's in jail, right? Like, you can still get that deal done, no harm, no foul. Probably don't need to disclose, right? So I think it just depends on a case by case basis. And obviously you guys aren't going to run into this very often, or if you do, like, hang out with different people, but this is hopefully an uncommon thing. So if you guys run into a weird deal, just come talk to us and I'll help you out. So, okay. Any other questions on duties that we must do that kind of fall under that umbrella of exercising reasonable skill and care for the buyer? Okay, so 5.2 talks about things that we must not disclose without the informed consent of the buyer. So it's not that we can't disclose them, it's just that we can't disclose them without the informed consent, right? If the buyer says, hey, you can disclose it, then by all means you can disclose it. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? But aside from, having that written, and this should be written, right? Don't ever just take a phone call because there's no way to prove it. But if we have that written consent of the buyer, or if we don't have written consent of the buyer, then what we can't disclose is that the buyer is willing to pay more than the purchase price offered for the property. Well, what about an escalation clause? Well, you have the buyer's written consent to do that if it's written into the contract and signed by the buyer, right? So that's okay, but forget about the fact that we're in a crazy hot market right now. What if we're in a market where, homes are sitting on the market for 9 months and buyer sees a property that they like and they go, hey, this thing has been on the market for 8 months, right? Let's hammer the seller and see what we can, get them down to. It's listed at 450. Let's go in and offer 400. And if they counter back, we'll move up to 425, right? And so you feel bad because you like the listing broker is your buddy, and you're like, hey buddy, really sorry about this $400,000 offer on your $450,000 listing. See what you can do to it, see what you can do with it, and send me a counter and I'll see what I can push through, right? Like, you're crossing the line as far as, a gray area. Your client wanted to offer 400,000, right? Go fight for 400,000. And, if the sellers don't like that, and if the listing broker doesn't like that, then that's their prerogative to counter or present you with the evidence, right? That here's my comps, here's how we came up with our price or whatever. But don't cross that line of like, hey, send me a counter, my buyer will probably come up a little bit. Like, you've just violated your duties to your client. Okay. And, it doesn't typically come up where a broker's like, hey, here's my offer at 400. But if you send me a counter at 425, Dave, we can work that out. I'll push that through on my end. Okay. It doesn't normally come up like that. But again, you're crossing that into that gray area where it's like, hey, send me a counter and I'll push it through. Or, buyer's willing to come up a little bit if that's what it takes to get the deal closed. Like, not good. Okay. So write your offer, go fight for whatever it is. If you think the buyer should be offering more, then have that conversation with your buyer before you write the offer. Okay. You can't disclose what the buyer's motivating factors are. Now, there's certainly some things that you can reasonably interpret from the contract, right? If there's a clause in your contract, let's say that you're working with the buyer on this deal, but your buyer also has to sell their home, right? One of the clauses that the buyer might want to write into the contract for the house that they have to sell, right? They might want a provision that says, hey, if we can't lock down a new home to purchase, then we have the right to kill the deal on our contract for the home that we're selling, right? Well, if that's the case, like, the parties might know, hey, let's say you get a home under contract. Well, now the buyers know, hey, they're under contract on a new place. We kind of have you where we want you, right? Because you don't want to lose the new property. And so we're going to hit you hard on inspections, knowing that you're under contract on another property to purchase, and you probably don't want to lose that one. Okay. So there's some motivations that can be interpreted from the contracts themselves, and that's okay. Again, if it's written into the contract, it's written into the contract. But, again, perfect example, there was a house out in Greeley in the same neighborhood as one of my listings. And turns out that one day the husband walks into the front door, and as he opens the front door, the door hits his wife, who is hanging in the entryway, right? Well, he had motivation to get out of that house. He couldn't live there anymore, just emotionally, right? It was not a good place for him to be in from an emotional standpoint. And he just wanted to dump the house as fast as he could and be done with it. Okay. And so, that type of thing, that's certainly a motivating factor. And we can't disclose that without our party's written consent, right? That's not something that we should share. Okay, and Colorado is a non-disclosure state for stigmatized properties anyway. But if we have the written consent of the buyer, or in this case, it would have been the seller, right? If we have their written consent, we can absolutely disclose. I showed another property in Fort Collins, and it was kind of a weird property. The guy that owned it was a contractor, and so it was like every time the guy had leftover job site materials, he would remodel one of the rooms of his house. But those materials never actually lined up with each other because they were all from different projects. And so every room that you went into, it looked like a different house. It looked like it belonged in a different house, right? So it was already a little bit weird. But then we go into the basement, and in the basement, there's a bedroom where it had these like big square plaster ceiling tiles, kind of like ornate, like, New Orleans French Quarter looking plaster tiles, right? And they were hung on the ceiling. Well, there was one that was missing in the middle of the ceiling, right? The tile was gone, and there was a hole that was drilled into the ceiling there. Well, we didn't think anything of it at the time. We just thought maybe that tile had fallen off or whatever. And, as we go back upstairs, the seller's property disclosure is laying on the counter. And, my clients are like flipping through it. And at the very end, the remaining spouse, the other seller, had just written in there that, the other seller, her spouse, had committed suicide in the basement bedroom. Like, so if you have the consent, you can disclose whatever the buyer or seller are willing to allow, to be disclosed. But without that, we can't be disclosing what the buyer's motivating factors are. Okay. This one doesn't come up too much. We can't disclose that the buyer will agree to financing terms other than those offered, right? So, presumably you might have a buyer who says, hey, like, I'm going to submit this offer as an FHA offer because I can get a better rate on FHA. But if I have to go conventional, right, I have the money to put 5% down instead of 3.5% down, but it's going to squeeze me and it's going to jack up my rate by 1/4 point or whatever, right? So you submit it as an FHA offer, and the listing broker is like, hey, is there any chance you guys can go conventional because I'm a little bit worried about the peeling paint on the property? Any chance you guys can go conventional? Well, I mean, if you don't have the written consent of the buyer to say, yeah, go ahead and offer it up as conventional, then the answer is, I don't know. I mean, my client has presented it as FHA. I can certainly take it back to them, but I can't make any guarantees, right? Even if I know that they'll do it, unless they've given me written permission to do it, I can't disclose that they'll agree to financing terms other than those offered, okay? We can't disclose, we already talked about this one, any material information about the buyer unless it's required by law, or failure to disclose that info would constitute fraud or dishonest dealing. Okay, already talked about that. So any questions on 5.2, stuff that we can't disclose? We did talk a little bit about meth. If you guys were at the ACU where Damien taught, where he taught the 3 offices combined, I don't think this comes up in the ACU normally. This was kind of a side question that had entered our conversation. And so there was a question about meth, and the law is very clear that a seller has a carve out or a protection from disclosing that a property was formerly used as a meth lab if they have the required documentation from the state. So if the seller has that documentation, they say, hey, it's been cleaned to state standards, we've had it checked, we have the report from CDPHE, right? And the report shows that it's clean. The seller has no legal obligation, and they are protected from a legal standpoint for not disclosing that if it's been cleaned to state standards. The problem is the law is ambiguous, and really it doesn't mention the broker. Okay, so the broker is really offered no protection under the law when it comes to disclosing that the property was a former meth lab, even if the seller has those reports. And so what our company policy says is if you are listing a property that was formerly used as a meth lab, even if it has been cleaned to state standards, right? We have to disclose the fact that it was formerly used as a meth lab. And if your seller doesn't like that because they say, hey, Stephanie, like I have the reports, I don't have to disclose it. And so you can't disclose it either because that's going to impact the value of my property. Then we need to refuse to take that deal or refer it out to somebody outside of KW. Okay. There's just too much legal liability there on those meth labs. So that's one of those things where disclosure, there's actually a different standard for a seller than there is for a broker, because normally we both have the same standard of disclosing adverse material facts. Okay. Okay, section 5.3 just says buyer consents to the broker's disclosure of their confidential info to the supervising broker. Because as a supervising broker, I have, I have a legal obligation, due to real estate license law to supervise my brokers at a reasonable level or a high level, depending on your experience. Okay, so I have to have access. If you're one of my brokers, I have to have access to that confidential information in order to supervise you. That's as required by law. Okay. Now, a little caveat is it says provided that the supervising broker designate doesn't further disclose that information without the consent of the buyer or use that information to the detriment of the buyer. So if you're one of my brokers and we're doing a deal together, you really shouldn't be disclosing that confidential info to me. What happens is we will designate an additional supervising broker to effectively become your, de facto managing broker for that one particular deal. Okay. So that's just real estate license law requires that. 5.4 is always fun. You can show properties in which the buyer is interested to other prospective buyers that you're working with without breaching any duties or obligations that you owe to your buyer. So again, many of you guys have probably heard this story, but I have some friends that I go to church with, and they called me up and they said, hey, Jesse, we'd like to go see this property at 123 Main Street. I'm like, okay, great. What time do you want to see it? And they're like, how about 5 o'clock? Okay, great. So set up the appointment for 5 o'clock, and I get a call from another friend from church who happens to be mutual friends with the people who had just called me and said, hey, let's see this property at 5 o'clock, right? And so now our mutual friend also calls me up and says, hey, Jesse, I see this property that just got listed at 123 Main Street. Can we go see it? Yep, absolutely. Let's go see it. What time works for you? And they're like, how about 5 o'clock? I'm like, oh, I have another appointment at 5. How about 6 o'clock? And they're like, okay, yeah, 6 o'clock is great. And so I'm thinking like, oh, yeah, like that's good. Now they're not going to know that, I'm showing the property to both sets of buyers, right? Well, I show up at, 5 o'clock to show it to party number 1. Okay. And while we're inside at 5 o'clock, guess who does a little drive-by on their way home from work? Buyer number 2. And they see my car outside, and they also see the other person's car outside, and they're like, huh, I'm just going to walk inside. And so while I'm in there showing it to buyer number 1, in walks buyer number 2. And now it's like this super awkward 3-way, like, hey, what are you guys doing here? Right. And in the meantime, I had told buyer number 2, like, oh, I have an appointment at 5 o'clock. Well, my appointment was to show the same freaking property to buyer number 1. Right. So that was a little bit weird. I had exclusive right to buy signed with both of them. So what am I supposed to do? Right. Well, I don't know, refer out one of those deals to somebody else. I mean, fortunately, in this case, even though it was super weird and super awkward, right? Those two parties, they actually both wanted to submit an offer on the property, but they actually spoke to each other and said, okay, which one of us is willing to make the stronger offer on the property? And then, they determined that themselves. And then buyer number 1 ended up saying, okay, we'll go pursue something else. Okay. But if you have an exclusive right to buy with two parties and they both want to submit an offer on the same property, then what do you do? Because let's jump down to section 6, right? Let's say you're a buyer's agent for both of them. Okay. You have a duty to promote the interest of the buyer with the utmost good faith, loyalty, and fidelity. How can you do that for two different people on the same property? You can't, right? And so what you probably are going to have to do is say, hey, you know, like, I know the circumstances of both of my clients. I know that these people are more financially qualified or whatever. They're the ones that are going to make the better offer. I will refer this buyer out to another broker at my company, right? Or wherever else, and say, hey, I'm going to refer you this deal for this one property. It is only for this one property. Otherwise, my exclusive right to buy remains in place. Okay. And you're going to write the contract for this one. And I'm probably going to ask you for more than a 25% referral, right? Like we normally see. I will probably ask you for like 50% because I've just basically gifted you the golden client. If your offer gets accepted, you didn't have to do anything other than mostly paperwork, right? So be careful if you have two different buyers who actually want to offer on the same property, okay? But as far as just showing properties, you're not violating any duties to any of your clients as far as, you know, showing a property that one buyer likes to another prospective buyer. It doesn't matter, okay? You're not prohibited from showing competing buyers the same property and from assisting competing buyers in an attempt to purchase a particular property. Again, keep in mind, this is listed under the transaction broker duty. So if you can truly remain a neutral third party, then okay, like maybe you have a case, but if you're a buyer's agent, I think it's impossible for you to do that if you are supposed to promote the interest of your buyer with the utmost good faith, loyalty, and fidelity. And most attorneys would agree. Okay. So that one's a little bit weird. Broker is not obligated to seek other properties while the buyer is already a party to the contract, to a contract for the purchase of another property. So, you know, effectively, you're not obligated to go try to find, you know, they say, hey, Brandy, this market really sucks. We put an offer on this property because it was the only thing available, but we still want you to go find us a property that fits our needs better. Well, you're not obligated to do it. Doesn't mean that you can't, right? But you have no obligation to go try to find other properties while they're currently a party to a contract to purchase the property, okay? 5.6, I kind of hit on this earlier, but it says broker has no duty to conduct an independent inspection of the property for the benefit of the buyer, and you have no duty to independently verify the accuracy or completeness of any statements that were made by the seller or independent inspectors, right? So, you know, this is one of those things where the real estate commission gets a lot of complaints and they say, well, you know, broker, you didn't disclose to me the fact that the foundation was crap. Well, unless the broker had specific knowledge that the foundation was crap, they don't have to do an independent inspection of the property. They don't have to verify whether those statements are true that were made by, you know, an inspector or anything else, right? That's outside of our lane as a real estate broker. Okay. Now, that being said, if you have a report from an inspector or a structural engineer or whatever it is, and it says, hey, there's a potential issue here, then absolutely that is something that should be disclosed. Okay. And Damien hit on this in the ACU, but you know, some inspectors have a little clause in their inspection report, and it says, you know, this report should not be shared, you know, it cannot be shared or used by anyone other than, you know, the buyer, right? And at the end of the day, that means nothing, okay? Because Colorado law says, if you've disclosed something to me as the seller or the listing broker, I have a legal obligation that will trump any type of statement that inspector puts in their report. I have a legal obligation to disclose that to a new prospective buyer, okay? So, you know, we don't have to verify the accuracy of those reports, but we have to disclose them if it's an adverse material fact. And who decides what an adverse material fact is? What do you think?
The judge.
Yeah, the judge, and really before it even gets to that point, probably the buyer, right? The buyer's going to say, well, this was material to me. If I had known this, I wouldn't have purchased the property, right? And then, the dispute gets far enough and it goes to a judge, and the judge says, okay, yeah, I think to a reasonable person, that probably is something that would be material. It is certainly adverse and it is a fact, right? So yeah, seller, you're bad for not disclosing the adverse material fact, but now you're on the hook for it. Okay, so the best practice is just disclose whatever reports you have. If we've got one of our brokers has a property that just is a never ending nightmare. They keep getting, new buyers get interested, they go under contract. And lo and behold, it's like something new on the freaking inspection every single time, right? And they're like, well, do I have to disclose this? And it's like, well, you need to probably just provide the whole report, right? So now they have like 4 inspection reports and reports from structural engineers and everything else. Well, buyer number 4 had a structural engineer come out and issue a report that says, hey, there's some potential issues as far as the foundation goes. And it's causing the siding to peel away from the house at the, front left corner or whatever, right? Well, the sellers didn't like that. And so they went and they got their own structural engineer. Their structural engineer comes out and says, hey, we've looked at this and this property's probably been this way for the past 100 years. Like, it hasn't moved as far as we can tell. It's not causing any, current issues. And so there's really nothing that can be done or nothing that should be done, right? There's things that could be done to, truly restore it, but it's not going to get any worse, right? According to what we're seeing. And so the seller's like, well, now that I have this engineer's report that says, hey, I don't see any, current issues, there's really nothing you need to do I still have to disclose the initial report from the buyer's engineer that says, hey, there's a potential issue here? So what do you guys do? What do you think?
I think you have to disclose both those reports, provide them to the buyer so they can make up their mind how important it is to them.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a report that says, hey, there's no issues, right? Why not just give them the one that says there are issues too and say, hey, we had our guy come out and look at it, and we feel like this guy was just, he was working on behalf of the buyers, right? But we had our guy come out and look at it, and he said there's really nothing that needs to be done. There's no current structural concern as far as this house goes, right? Then if the buyers decide to take their own action and get their own engineer, a third opinion, great. And if they don't, then even better, right? They're just moving forward with the information that we've given them, right? But they can't come back after closing and say, hey, you failed to disclose an adverse material fact to me, because inevitably you're just going to provide the one report that says there's no issues. And then what's going to happen after closing? Every freaking time, right? There's going to be foundation issues. That's just how it happens, right? And so then they're going to say, hey, we think you guys colluded with this engineer to give us a bogus report. And it turns out you had another report, which is why you got this second report or whatever. Like, it's just all bad. So it's best to just disclose both. Then there's no way they can turn back to you after closing and say, hey, Nancy, you failed to disclose an adverse material fact. You tried to cover it up with this bogus report from engineer number 2, right? No, I gave you both reports, right? You are welcome to interpret them as you please. You were welcome to have your own inspections, get a third opinion. You chose not to. That's not on me. That's on you, right? So best practice, absolutely just give them both, okay? Let's see. 5.7, broker must disclose to any prospective seller all adverse material facts actually known by a broker, including adverse material facts about the buyer's financial ability to perform the terms of the transaction and whether they intend to occupy the property as a principal residence, right? I hate the fact that we have to disclose, whether it's going to be a principal residence for them or not. I think that's really more for the lender's sake, but why you would need to disclose to the seller whether you occupy the property as your principal residence, I think is completely bogus. but unfortunately, that's part of the deal. That's Colorado law. And that's why there's a box in our contract to buy and sell that says, is the buyer going to occupy this as a principal residence? Okay. But we do have to disclose any adverse material facts regarding the buyer's financial ability to perform the terms of the contract. So, where you might, perfect example, we had a deal where we were representing the buyer. Buyer wanted to purchase a property that was for sale, but it was a relocation property, right? And the relo company said, hey, like, we like your price and we like your terms and everything else, but our policy is that we will not accept a contingent offer, because our buyer client had to sell her home in order to purchase this new one. And so what we did is we said, okay, we'll remove the contingency, right? In other words, if our house doesn't sell, we are willing to put our earnest money at stake and cough that up to the relo company, right? But in doing that, we removed the contingency to be able to terminate the contract, but we couldn't perform the terms of the contract as it was written unless and until we sold their house, okay? And so what we did, the relo company wanted a $10,000 earnest money deposit. And if they weren't going to accept a contingency, that was just not very comfortable. And so we were able to negotiate the earnest money down to $2,000, right? And then take that contingency to sell the property out. And then when we emailed the offer over to listing broker, we just said, hey, no problem. We're happy to remove the contingency, but we have a legal obligation to disclose to you that we can't purchase it unless and until we sell our property, right? We go, okay, that's fine. And so they present it to the relo company, and relo company goes, okay, yeah, we like the price, we like the closing date, we like everything else. Like, I don't even know if they had the discussion of like, hey, the buyers dropped the earnest money from 10 grand to 2 grand, but that's not my problem, right? They signed the offer, they accepted it, and we move forward. Luckily, everything worked out for us. Okay.
Jesse, you wrote that in additional provisions, or did you just send them an email?
I just sent an email because
Okay.
I knew the offer was going to the relo company, right?
Okay.
And I don't have direct access to contact the relo company, but if I tell their agent, then that's all my obligation requires me to do. So there are things that can be communicated outside of the contract, and that's really something not related specifically to this, but that's something that is important for you guys to understand, is that there are things that can be communicated outside the contract that we don't need to booger up the contract with a bunch of extra crap, right? If it's not something that we want to be legally binding, then convey whatever it is you're trying to convey outside of the contract, right? You should be communicating with the listing broker anyway. And some of those things should be conveyed in writing. So probably via email as opposed to a phone call, but not everything needs to be in writing either. So, use your communication skills to convey whatever needs to be conveyed outside of the contract, and that's okay. Okay. 5.8, buyer understands the buyer's not liable for the broker's acts or omissions if they haven't been approved by the buyer. Okay, so bottom line, don't do anything that your buyer hasn't authorized you to do. Okay. So any questions on section 5, those duties of a transaction broker? Or they also apply again if you're a buyer's agent as well. Okay. Section 6 is where we talk about those fiduciary duties, or those additional duties of a buyer's agent. So if and only if the buyer's agency box is checked at the top of page 1, then you assume these additional duties. But if that box is not checked, it says buyer agency at the top of this contract, you cannot do these items, right? And the real estate commission is hammering transaction brokers who are acting like buyer's agents or seller's agents. Okay, so be careful. You need to know if you're going to be a transaction broker, you need to stay in your lane. If it's impossible for you to stay in your lane, then be an agent for whichever party it is you're talking about. But those additional duties, we kind of already talked about 6.1, promoting the interest of the buyer with the utmost good faith, loyalty, and fidelity. 6.2, seeking price and terms that are acceptable to the buyer. And 6.3 is counseling the buyers to any material benefits or risks of a transaction that are actually known by the broker. Right. And so if you guys know that you're competing against a transaction broker for a listing or for a buyer, right, then especially if you know that particular broker happens to work at one of the brokerage firms, right, where that's their policy, is transaction brokerage only, which is much more common up north than it is down in Castle Rock, I think. But up north, we've got the group, and the group, their policy is transaction brokerage no matter what. Okay. So if I know that I'm going up against a groupie, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this conversation. This is going to be one of the very first conversations that I'm going to have. Right. And I went to a listing appointment on it was like a $2.1 million house. And they said, hey, I gotta tell you, we're also interviewing, and they told me the guy's name. I happen to know that he's a group agent. Right. And so the very first question that I had for these people after kind of touring their house was, tell me what it is that you want in the broker that you choose to represent you. Right. And guess what they said? Effectively this, right? It didn't sound like this, but this is effectively what they said. Right. I want someone who's going to protect my best interest. I want someone who's going to fight on my behalf. I want someone who's going to, whatever. And they just spew it all out. I said, great, let's have a conversation about brokerage relationships. Right. Guess who they didn't list it with? They didn't list it with the group agent. They also didn't list it with me. They listed it with someone else. And lo and behold, it's still on the market. So I don't feel bad for them, but they, at least they understand, like, okay, that person can really truly only be a neutral party in the transaction, which is not something that I want with my $2 million investment. Right. So use those to your advantage, right? Especially if you're up against, a broker, whether it's a group agent or someone else that happens to represent their clients as a transaction broker. There's a couple places up in Estes Park, right, that they do the same thing. They're always transaction broker. And if you guys aren't familiar, at least in Iris, I don't think they have it in RE Colorado, but in Iris, if you scroll down to the bottom of if you pull up a particular listing, if you scroll down to the bottom, it tells you the listing contract. It'll say exclusive right to buy or exclusive right to sell transaction broker, or exclusive right to sell seller's agent or agency, or whatever, however it words it. So you can kind of get the feel for, hey, who represents their clients as a transaction broker versus a seller's agent. Okay. So use that to compete if that's applicable for you. Okay. Okay, we talked about compensation last week. Did anybody have any questions? Anybody want to review this again? Nothing. Okay. Limitation on third-party compensation. So bottom line, guys, do not accept any compensation from any other person or entity in connection with the property without the written consent of the buyer, right? And neither broker nor brokerage firm is permitted to assess and receive markups or other compensation for services performed by any third party or affiliated business entity unless the buyer signs a written consent for such services. And bottom line, don't have them sign a written consent for such services, because RESPA still probably applies. Keep in mind, this is a Colorado contract. So while this may not be against the law from a Colorado standpoint, RESPA is a federal law, and we can't accept additional compensation, from parties that are connected to the closing, right? So lenders, inspectors, title companies, whatever. We just shouldn't be accepting any additional third-party compensation. Okay. We also should not take any additional compensation from our buyer client, right? They say, hey, Caleb, we really appreciate all the hard work you've done over the course of this transaction for us. We would really like to bonus you and give you an extra $500, right? Well, that's against the law. Okay. Now, from time to time, they might send you a gift card or, a gift basket or whatever. That's okay. Right. But if they want to slip you extra money under the table, not okay. That's against the law. It needs to be disclosed on the settlement statements. Okay. Buyer's obligations to broker. So Buyer agrees to conduct all negotiations for the property only through the broker and refer to the broker any communications that they receive from other brokers, which hopefully is none, right? No other broker should be talking to your clients, or any communication they receive from prospective sellers or any other source during the term of the listing contract. So, I've had issues with, my buyer clients reaching out to the neighbor of a seller in a particular transaction. Not going to go into all the details because half of you guys have heard the story before. But anyway, the neighbor happened to be like besties with the seller. And so when my buyer client had reached out to the neighbor and they're like, oh, that property is perfect for us. We love it. Right. And all this stuff. And it happened to be in a market where it wasn't a crazy hot seller's market. And this property was on the market for a long time. And so we were planning on hammering the sellers with a low offer. Right. And lo and behold, the neighbor's like, yeah, they said they love your property and it's absolutely perfect for them in every way. Like, what do you think the seller said to our low offer? No. Right. So they kind of shot themselves in the foot by not conducting all negotiations for the property through me, the broker. Right. I never would have gone to the neighbor and said, hey, neighbor, can you go tell your next door neighbor that you're probably friends with that my clients really love the property and it's perfect for them in every way. And, oh, by the way, we're going to send you over a low offer. I wouldn't do that. Right. So important to conduct all the negotiations through you. You're trained not to do those things. Right. From time to time, you get some weird stuff, right? That this is more specific to the buyer because it's the exclusive right to buy. But let's say the seller side, you have a listing, right? And someone just walks up and knocks on the door and says, oh, hey, I'm Joe Buyer. Can I see your property? What should the sellers do? Well, they should probably reach out to you or, have a stack of have a stack of your cards at the house and say, hey, I appreciate that. Can you contact my broker? Right. And I'm sure they can arrange a showing for you. Right. So they need to conduct communications, negotiations, all that stuff through you. Okay. Buyer represents that they are or are not currently a party to an agreement with another broker. Hopefully they are not currently a party to another agreement. But what happens if they reach out to you and they say, hey, Grady, and I'm not picking on Grady for an answer. Anybody feel free to chime in. But they say, hey, I'm currently under contract with Joe Broker at Remax, and he's really just not doing a good job for me. I don't want to work with him anymore. I would like you to be my agent. What do you do? Nobody? Somebody take a stab at it.
Tell them,
You'd
hey,
refuse to take the contract, wouldn't you? Refuse to.
Okay, so that's certainly one option is to just flat out say, hey, I'm really sorry, I can't help you right now. What
You
else?
can
Kevin?
contact
Oh,
that
Joe.
broker. Contact
Okay.
their broker.
You can certainly contact their brokers. That makes things a little bit weird, right? And they're going to say, hey, Jeffrey, like, what are you talking to my client for? They're going to be pissed. Okay. So you certainly could. I don't know that I would do that, but yeah, you could certainly contact that broker. But contacting them doesn't change anything as far as their relationship goes, right?
yeah, you need to
Evan-
tell the client, hey, you need to end the relationship with your broker before I can engage.
So careful, because what we can't do is a couple things. One is we can't advise them to terminate their relationship with another broker. It's against the code of ethics, probably against license law, right? So we can't advise them to terminate it. We also cannot advise them on their contract with their current agent, right? The Real Estate Commission says we have a limited authority to practice law, which includes interpreting standard forms, right? And so brokers think, oh, well, the exclusive right to buy that they have with this other broker, that's a standard form. It's from the Real Estate Commission. Therefore, I should have a right to interpret that. Wrong. Okay. Your authority to interpret those standard forms ends with contracts that are written by you. And so what I don't ever want you to do is I don't ever want you to say, hey, why don't you send me your contract that you have with the other broker and let me look at it, right? And then I'll figure something out. There's no reason for you to ever have a form that was written by another broker. If the buyer is concerned that, hey, I may, I'm still in a contract with, my other broker, they need to seek legal advice as to their potential options as far as maybe getting out of that contract if they have a right to do that. But I'm not going to be the one to tell them how. I'm not going to be the one to tell them if they have a right to do that. I don't even want that contract. I don't want to see it, right? I don't want to know what your holdover deal is. I don't want to know anything about your form because it's not mine and I have no duty to interpret it. Okay.
And then come see you when it expires.
Well, so kind of, so that your option is either refuse it, right? Or you can sign the listing while they are still under contract with another broker, right? You can sign it with a start date that starts upon the expiration, not upon the termination, but upon the expiration of the other contract, right? So you're going to ask them, when does your other contract expire, right? And they say, oh, it expires on March 30th, right? Okay, great. Mine's going to start on March 31st. We can sign it today. And then, if you can't find anything in the meantime, I will start representing you on March 31st. Okay. So those are your options. Either refuse to do it or take it upon the expiration of their other contract. Now, if they come to you and they say, hey, Gary, I've terminated my contract with my other broker. Okay. That's all fine and good too. Then you can take the list, you take the buyer's, buyer listing, you can take it that day if they're comfortable signing your exclusive right to buy. Because to the best of your knowledge, they have no current, exclusive right to buy with another broker if their other contract has been terminated. I just can't be the one to advise them how to do that, whether they have a right to do that, or help them figure out when that contract expires, because it's not my job to interpret their form, and I have no legal authority to do so.
Do you
Does
ask
that
to see it, Jesse, to see the expiration, or no? You just take them at their word, get it in writing and move forward?
The only reason for you to ever see that form would be for you to provide advice on that form, and you're stepping outside of your lane as a real estate broker and providing legal advice. So I don't even want to see it. Like, you're just taking on additional liability and seeing their exclusive right. If they're not comfortable signing with you until they, have some definitive answer as to this, they either need to talk to their broker over here, or they need to go talk to an attorney and get a legal opinion. But when they sign my form, they need to be confident in signing my form that they have no, remaining obligation, or, maybe they have an obligation as far as a holdover goes, right? And we can work that into ours, but I'm just taking them at their word, right? So who are we going to exclude in our exclusive right to buy? Which properties, right, are we going to exclude from our exclusive right to buy? Because they are bound in the holdover clause with their broker on this contract. Okay. And so then what that looks like is, okay, I'll be your buyer's agent for anything other than, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9 Main Street. Right. And so if I am, if you decide to pursue one of those properties, then my duties will be paused. Right. And you'll be obligated to work with some other broker for those 3 properties. And if you close on that, great. If you don't close on that, then my properties resume, or my duties resume once that contract gets terminated, right? And then I become your buyer's agent again. Okay. Does that make sense? You guys have questions on that? Because that's a little weird.
It would be hard not to just jump in and want to help them. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you covered that.
Yeah. And I've been there, guys. Like, it's one of those things, like, you see the commission dollars on the table and it's like, yeah, let me be the one to tell you when your contract is up, or, whatever. And the problem, let me stop screen share. So the problem comes in, and this was something that actually happened, and I'm not going to go into all the detail, but there was and this was on the seller side as opposed to the buyer side, but same concept applies. One of our brokers saw that there was a property that had expired in the MLS, right? And so he went up to, go knock on the door, try to get the listing, right? And it turns out it was the one that his buyer had written a contract on while it was listed, and they were just too far apart. But now he sees that it's expired. And so he goes and he knocks on the seller's door and says, hey, if we can cut a commission out of this deal, we're right there. We're already together. So, I'm willing to put this deal together. I'll treat the buyer as, transaction broker, treat you as a transaction broker. I'll do it for 3%, right? Or whatever. And seller's like, okay, well, can you look over, our contract, make sure that we have no, continuing obligation to our former broker. And, of course, our agent was wanting to do the right thing, right? Advise his clients and everything else. So he's like, yeah, just send it to me. Well, he sends it to, our broker. Our broker looks at it. He's like, yeah, it's expired. Like, you're good. Well, what our broker didn't know, and what the sellers didn't tell him, is that, the broker who had it listed had sent a new listing contract, and one of the two sellers had already signed the new listing contract, right? So that was a potential problem, right? I don't think that contract is valid, even with just one of them signing, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the seller, what ended up happening, right? Because our broker said, oh no, you have no obligation to your previous broker, right? So what happened was our broker then puts the deal together, it closes, former listing broker
Sure.
says,
Yeah, I'd be glad to look
hey,
into that for you.
Gary, our broker puts it together. Former broker looks at public records after closing, sees that, hey, that was the buyer who had written a contract while we were under contract, or while I had your property listed, right? And then they pursued us for a procuring cause claim for 3% of the commission, because that's what they had, listed for on the listing side, right? Well, we were only getting 3% because we were doing it for, as if we were cutting another broker out of the deal. And now we're getting pursued with procuring cause claim for, 3% of the commission, which was the full commission, right? Well, over the course of, that turned into a big old dispute. Lawyers got involved, right? Because what happened was former broker actually sued the sellers for the commission and came up after us with a procuring cause claim. Well, because the former listing broker pursued the sellers, right? The sellers then came after us and said, hey, broker, you advised us that we had no continuing obligation to the former broker, right? And so the fact that we had their contract, their listing contract, all got flushed out by the attorneys. And they're like, yeah, you stepped outside of your lane as a real estate broker, and you provided legal advice on a contract that you didn't write. So you can either cough up the commission, or you can, we can go fight this in court, right? So we ended up settling on half and half, but we never should have had that contract in the first place. Okay.
So Jesse,
Yep.
I think I know the answer to this, but so let's say let's say on 9 that you checked has, right? So you see property and they end up so the deal works out on one of those properties. The old listing or the old broker then becomes their client or their agent again, correct?
Well, that's not really for us to decide, right? However they decide to work that out is up to them. It's just
We're
out of it, right?
Okay,
Because because we've been notified now that there are properties under which they may have an obligation to pay a commission, and we have a duty to not put our client in a position of potentially having to pay 2 commissions, right? And so what we have to do is protect ourselves by saying, okay, I'm going to be your buyer's agent. However, I'm not going to be your buyer's agent for these 3 properties that are submitted prospects or submitted properties, right? So if you decide to pursue one of those, you need to go to whoever it is that you may owe a commission to and get that worked out. However, my exclusive right to buy is not going to terminate in the meantime. It's just not going to apply to those properties. But if you don't decide to purchase one of those, you are now bound to the terms of my contract, right? And so they have to then be careful about signing a new contract with the former broker that doesn't obligate them to, all properties, right? They're not signing them up as their new buyer's agent for any property. It's only for those three or the one that they're going to pursue or whatever, right? But how they work that out, that's up to them. That's not our concern. Okay. Buyer further represents the buyer has or has not received the list of any submitted properties, which is what I was talking about with regards to the holdover clause, right? If they've received a list of submitted properties, then you would check the has box. And that's where we would go down into additional provisions and say, hey, this is not going to apply to, either the attached list of submitted properties, or you can list them in additional provisions or whatever, right? So that's how you would do that, is you would just check the has box and then list somewhere, whether it's in additional provisions or an attachment, addendum, or whatever, you would list those submitted properties for which no commission would be payable and your duties would not apply. Okay.
What constitutes a submitted property?
Yeah, good question. So if we go to the holdover clause, right, this is where it defines what a submitted property is. And so effectively it says that holdover clause would apply to any property that is contracted for, not closed, but contracted for during the listing period, or any extensions, within X number of calendar days after expiration. Okay. But there's some caveats. It has to be if the property is one on which the broker negotiated. Now, that doesn't mean you have to write a contract, right? But it does mean there has to be some kind of negotiation, some kind of dialogue. It is not just properties that you showed. Okay. So has to be during the extension period, right? Or the listing period. It has to be one on which you've negotiated, and the former broker would have to submit its address in writing to the buyer during the listing period. Okay. So you can't wait until your listing period expires and then say, oh, here you go. Here's the list of properties on which I've negotiated. That wouldn't apply, right? Because it didn't happen during the listing period. You have to notify them in writing during the listing period of any properties on which you've actually negotiated. And it has to go under contract either during the listing period or within, 30 days or 60, 90, whatever you put in there. Okay. And then the last little caveat is, if that commission is earned by another broker acting pursuant to another exclusive right to buy, then will that commission be owed or will it not? If it says will not, well, now you've got an exclusive right to buy as the new broker. And then regardless of what they checked up here, put in the blank or whatever, it's not going to apply anyway, because they said it won't be payable if it's earned by another brokerage firm. So that's where, the submitted property is defined right here is, it's one on which you've negotiated, and two, it's one where you have submitted the description in writing to the buyer during the listing period. Okay. Let's see. Section 10, so the right to the party to cancel. So again, keep in mind, this is not a unilateral contract. This is a bilateral contract. It has to be signed by both parties. Any changes have to be, mutually agreed to and in writing and signed by both parties. Okay. But what happens if one of the parties defaults under the terms of the contract? So to start off with, if the buyer defaults under the terms of this contract, then what happened? Or sorry, if the listing broker defaults under the terms of the contract, and when I say listing, I'm talking about buyer listing. If the buyer's broker defaults, what's the buyer's right to cancel? Well, the buyer has the right to cancel if any of these things happens, right? If you abandon the buyer, well, where is abandonment defined in this contract? It's not, right? So again, there's some subjectivity here. And at the end of the day, if it went to court, a judge is the one who gets to determine whether the buyer's been abandoned. So how do you prove that you did not abandon the buyer?
Email or text documentation.
No
Okay.
text.
Yeah, so, phone calls are okay too. I mean, having a call log is okay, but it's hard to say what happened, or what was said over the course of those phone calls, right? So I like to do a lot of my stuff in writing, whether it's email or text or whatever, and you should keep those in your file. Email is a little bit easier to go back and access, but what happens if you drop your phone in the pool and, or take it for a swim or whatever, and you can't get those text messages back? Like, I mean, they're gone. So how do you prove that you didn't abandon the buyer? So I like email for that reason, but certainly having some kind of like, hey, I was checking in with them, I was sending them properties, I tried talking to them to see if there was anything they liked, right? Whatever. Okay. At the end of the day, the more the more documentation you have to prove that you didn't abandon the buyer, the better. Okay. If you fail to fulfill all material obligations of the broker, which we'll come back and we'll talk about material obligations, because what is a material obligation? We'll talk about. Okay. This one makes a little bit more sense. Failure to fulfill all of your material uniform duties, and you'll see that uniform duties are capitalized, right? And it tells you that those are found in section 5, and those are the duties of a transaction broker. So if you failed to fulfill one of your duties as a transaction broker, again, keep in mind, those apply whether you're a transaction broker or a buyer's agent. So if you fail to do one of those things, the buyer has a unilateral right to terminate. Okay. Or if the buyer agency box at the top of page 1 is checked and you fail to do one of those additional duties of the buyer's agent listed in section 6, then the buyer would have the right to terminate as well. Okay. So if we fail to fulfill a uniform duty or one of those fiduciary duties or the additional duties of a buyer's agent, buyer has a right to terminate. What the heck is a material obligation, and where is that defined? Well, it's not defined anywhere, right? Because it's not capitalized. It's not a defined term in the contract. So what is a material obligation? And how do you know if you've breached one of your material obligations to your client?
See section 5 and section 6.
Okay, so those are different. Those are actual brokerage duties, but they're not, they may be material, but they're not material obligations that are listed here, right? Because those are already defined. So a material obligation is anything else that you've effectively agreed to in your listing contract. Okay. And so there's a couple sections where material obligations may come into play. So one is right here, right? Any additional tasks that will be performed by the broker. Okay. If you write crap in here and then you fail to do it, then you could potentially be violating one of your material obligations to your client. Okay. Additional provisions, if there's something that you write in here that you agree to do, and then you don't do it, well, that's probably a material obligation that you've violated and given the right to the buyer to terminate, right? In the exclusive right to sell, there's another section, and it specifically talks about the broker's marketing, right? What are you going to do to market their property? Well, if you've said that you're going to do, my 21 point, marketing checklist, right? I'm going to do these 21 things for you. Okay. If you fail to do one of those 21 things, then the buyer can probably go, come back and claim, hey, you failed to do one of your material obligations. It was something that wasn't listed in section 5, right? It wasn't something that was listed in section 6. It was additional marketing that you agreed to do, which was material to my decision to list my property with you. And therefore you violated one of your material obligations, and I have a right to terminate your contract. Okay. So if you abandon the buyer, if you fail to fulfill one of those material obligations, if you fail to do one of your uniform duties, or if the buyer's agent's box is checked, then if you fail to do one of those additional duties, buyer has a right to terminate the contract. Now, any rights of the buyer that accrued prior to cancellation will survive such cancellation. That's maybe less of a thing than the broker's rights, which we'll talk about here, okay? But if the buyer had some, rights that had accrued prior to cancellation, then those would theoretically survive the cancellation of their contract, okay? So what is the broker's right to cancel? Well, the broker can cancel the listing contract upon written notice to buyer if the buyer fails to reasonably cooperate with the broker. Well, what does it mean to reasonably cooperate? Well, I don't know. It's not defined. Okay. So again, like this is something that there is no good definition of what it means for a buyer to fail to reasonably cooperate with you. But at the end of the day, you may have a case for being able to get out of your, duties to them as a transaction broker or a buyer's agent if they're just not cooperating with you. And if they're not cooperating with you, why not just terminate the contract anyway? They probably don't want to work with you. Okay. So that one's a little bit weird, but you can, if they fail to reasonably cooperate, or if they default under this buyer listing contract. Pretty vague, right? However, any rights of the brokerage firm that accrued prior to cancellation will survive the cancellation of the contract. So where that may come into play is if you help them put a property under contract, right? Keep in mind, last week we talked about when a sale with a capital S, how is a sale defined? You guys remember from last week? When does a sale of the property occur?
Closing?
It actually occurs prior to closing.
When they both sign, buyer and seller.
Yeah, so what it says, and I can't even remember where it's at now, but what it says is that a sale of the property, oh, here we go, section 7, where is it? Okay, so.
When earned, yep.
Yeah, so where did I just
Go back
saw it?
up.
That's for a lease.
Oh,
There we go. So the success fee, which is your commission, right, is earned by the brokerage firm upon the purchase of the property. Okay, and again, the purchase of the property is defined because it's capitalized with P's, right? And the way that it's defined is upon the creation of an obligation to convey interest in the property. And in effect, what that means is once a contract has been signed by all parties, your success fee has been earned, but it's not payable until the closing of the transaction. And so if your success fee has been earned, but then the buyer has a right to terminate the contract because of a broker's default, they may still have an obligation to pay your success fee because that accrued prior to the cancellation of the contract. Crazy, huh? Okay, any questions on section 10? Okay, section 11, cost of services. So broker's not going to obtain or order any work or anything from outside sources unless the buyers agree to pay for them. We had an issue in the Fort Collins office where one of the brokers on behalf of his client, client calls up and turns out they need an ILC for title. And so the broker calls up the survey company, says, hey, I need an ILC for this property. Survey company comes out and does it, sends the bill to the seller, and in the meantime, the transaction terminates. So guess what the seller didn't want to pay for? The ILC. Well, who ordered this? Who ordered the ILC? Our broker did. So guess who got stuck with the bill? The broker. And then he didn't pay, and they started taking him to collections for it. So don't do it unless it's been authorized, and I would say authorized in writing from the buyer. Okay. Neither broker nor brokerage firm is obligated to advance funds for the buyer. Again, bad idea. The brokerage firm certainly is not going to do that. I would recommend you as a broker not do that. Buyer must reimburse brokerage firm for payments that were made by the brokerage firm for any of those services that were authorized by the buyer. Again, brokerage firm is just not going to do that. Okay. think that's all pretty straightforward. Brokerage services. So the following additional tasks will be performed by broker. You know what I put in this section?
Nothing.
Nothing. I already have a 7-page contract. I already have a page full of duties that I have to do. I'm not taking on any additional liability. Okay. So this section in my contracts is blank. Do whatever you want, put whatever you want there, but know that it may become one of your material obligations, which potentially would give a buyer to the right to terminate. Okay, if you fail to do it. All right, showing properties. So buyer acknowledges broker has explained possible methods used by listing brokers to show properties, yada, yada. Brokers' limitations on accessing properties are as follows. Well, you know, if you don't have a super key, maybe you don't have the ability to get into a super lockbox. I don't know. Maybe you're limited by the seller showing instructions. Maybe your religion says you're not allowed to show properties on Sunday. Whatever your limitations are, put it in here, okay? Because that's the agreement between the parties, okay?
I usually, as a CYA, just put limited by sellers showing instructions. Is that necessary?
I do that too, right? Because if I can't get in, I can't show it to you. So that is typically the verbiage that I put in here. And that's the only thing that I typically put in here is that, you know, I'm limited by the seller showing instructions, because if they won't let us in, then no, I can't show you the property. Is it necessary? I don't know. But as a CYA, is it good to put in there? Yeah, it probably is. Okay. Broker through brokerage firm has access to which MLSs, right? Iris, RE Colorado, whatever. Okay, list them there. Disclosure of buyer's identity. So this is not like, do I have the right to sell your information on the dark web? Okay. This is just asking, do I have the buyer's permission to disclose their identity to third parties, right? And we're talking about third parties to the transaction. The inspector, the lender, the title company, right? All of those things, because otherwise I have to, you know, effectively give the information for the lender or the title company to the buyer and hope that the buyer reaches out so that title can get, you know, whatever info they need from the buyer, get them the title commitment and everything else. Okay. So typically I check the does box. I do have their permission to disclose their identity to third parties. Again, this is not like third parties on the dark web or whatever. This is parties to the transaction. Don't be selling your client's data. Okay. Disclosure of settlement service costs. So obviously there's different qualities and costs and extensive services that vary between different providers, whether we're talking about attorneys, lenders, inspectors, title companies, you name it. Okay. Best practice is just refer 3. Do I always refer 3 myself? No. Am I taking on a little bit of liability in doing that? Yes. Know your comfort level, but best practice is provide 3. And then if they choose from those 3, they can't come back and say, oh, hey, Jim, you told me to work with your one lender and they screwed up my deal. You know, you're colluding with the lender. You know, I think you're getting kickbacks and I'm filing a complaint against you. Okay. Probably isn't true. And if it is true, don't take kickbacks from your lender. Probably not true, but it certainly could be a headache for you that is easily cleared up if you're providing three names to your people. Okay. Wire fraud and other fraud. So wire fraud, guys, it's a big deal right now, right? People are wiring hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if for whatever reason, those wire instructions are getting intercepted and then changed with the fraudulent information and then forwarded on, right? That hundreds of thousands of dollars or 10,000, which, right, to some people, 10,000 is all they got, just like hundreds of thousands might be all that someone else has. The number is not important, right? If it's gone, it's gone. And it's detrimental to the buyers, okay? So make sure that you're advising your client regarding wire fraud, that they know the risks and they know how to hopefully avoid the pitfalls of wire fraud, okay? And really the way that they do that, for one, is if they get something in their email that says, hey, here's our wire instructions, what they need to do is not call the number that's shown on those wire instructions, because if they're hacking a bank account and putting fraudulent account info in there, they're probably hacking the phone number too, right? So don't call the number that's on those wire instructions. They need to like go to Google or go in person, right, to the title company and say, hey, I got these wire instructions. I just want to make sure that these are legit and make sure that they all match up, make sure that everything's good, right? And as long as they are, they're probably okay. But if they get some, it's like, hey, I called the title company and it turns out the bank account information is different. What should I do? Well, nix everything for the time being, right? Go in person to the title company, talk to the closer and say, hey, these are the wire instructions that I got. When I called title, I got a different answer. Which one is correct? Okay. And so again, just important to have that conversation with your client so that any money that they wire is not going to a fraudulent account. Okay. Removal of marketing material. So this was new in 2020. And basically what it says is that buyer acknowledges that some marketing material, that may be used by the seller or the seller's broker is difficult, if not impossible, to remove from some of those sites that we syndicate to, right? And so I don't know if they're still doing it because Zillow is undergoing a ton of changes, but historically what's happened on Zillow is you could go and you can pull up any property and what's going to be on there, the photos from the last time the property was listed. If it's not currently an active listing, right? Those old photos are going to show up. And so people were, suing over privacy concerns and everything else, right? And effectively what you're saying is, especially me as the buyer's broker, it's probably impossible for me to go remove those photos of the home that you're going to buy from those websites. I have no control over that, right? And, you're releasing the broker from any liability, from my inability to remove the pictures or the text or description or whatever, right? To remove that information from the internet. Okay. Non-discrimination, just don't do it, right? You need to know what the protected classes are. That's protected classes for the state as well as federal. There might be some local considerations as well. If you guys took the ACU with Damien, one of the things he brought up is that now hairstyle is a protected class in Colorado. And it really stems more from not a race, but like a national origin type class, I guess. So doesn't have to be tied to a national origin, but we can no longer discriminate based on hairstyle. So they're coming up with new stuff every day, guys. But bottom line, don't discriminate. There are some things that you can potentially, I don't know, discriminate just seems like a dirty word, right? But if someone says, hey, I'm an attorney and I want to buy this property for myself, can you discriminate against them? Well, yeah, you probably can, because occupation is not a protected class, right? And do you really want to go up against an attorney on the other side? Well, I don't know. There's some complete idiot attorneys out there who I could walk all over, and there's some other attorneys that I would want to have nothing to do with, right? So do you want to get taken advantage of by an attorney who maybe knows what they're doing, or do you not? I don't know. You could theoretically discriminate against them. Potentially a student, right? If you don't want to sell to a student, again, that's kind of occupation. Still probably not a great idea, but I assume at some point, like, they're just going to say you can't discriminate against anybody for any reason, regardless of any class, right? That's the direction we're moving towards. So just don't discriminate. Recommendation of legal and tax counsel. Obviously, you guys know if you can't, or you shouldn't provide legal or tax counsel, they need to go talk to an attorney, a CPA. Mediation is a little bit misunderstood. People think you absolutely have to go to mediation, and that is not entirely the case. It's possible that one party may request mediation, and then maybe the other side says, okay, yeah, let's mediate. And then the party who requested mediation says, no, I'm not going to mediation. And then you wait it out for 30 days and you proceed to court. Okay, that's kind of looked unfavorably upon by judges, because you're effectively just trying to get around the mediation clause. So not always a good idea, but in some cases, that's what happens. Okay. So bottom line, there has to be some proof that there was a start date. We requested mediation. We were unable to resolve it within those 30 days, and therefore we can proceed to court. Okay. Keep in mind, this is between you and the buyer. There's a similar clause in the contract between the buyer and seller. Okay. Attorney's fees, if for whatever reason you have to go to arbitration or litigation, not mediation, that's different. We'll talk about that. But if you have to go to arbitration or litigation, then the losing party would have to pay the attorney's fees. At mediation, the cost is split between the parties. Okay. Additional provisions. You know what I put in my additional provisions in my contracts?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay. For the same reason that I don't put it in additional duties of the broker, right? I don't put anything in here unless there is something really specific to a particular transaction, but I don't want a bunch of extra liability. I don't want to give the buyer the right to terminate. There's no reason for me to put anything else in here unless it's specific to a particular transaction. Attachments. You know what I attach to my contract?
Nothing.
Nothing. I don't need to. Okay. Physical delivery notice is just talking about documents, right? Physical delivery is fine. Electronic notice is fine by fax, email, and don't fax anything, guys. It's 2021. So you might run into some deals with banks or something like that you have to do a fax, but try not to fax because those don't always go very well. They sit on a fax machine for like 3 years and collect dust before anybody sees it. Electronic
Needs to tell the
delivery.
government that.
Harry still uses telegraphs, but we'll cut him a break on this. Choice of law. So obviously, if there's a dispute, it's going to be governed by Colorado law because that's where the property is located. Any modifications to the contract need to be in writing and signed by all parties in order to be binding. Counterparts just means that I can take this copy and I can give a separate copy to the buyer, right? They sign that copy, I sign this copy. As long as everything is the same, then we take that as one document. It doesn't have to be, signed on the same copy as long as everything's okay. The entire agreement we already talked about. This is the entire agreement between the parties. Any former, prior agreements, whether they are written or oral, they've been merged into this contract. So if you have something that you want to be enforced, write it in. If you don't, then don't write it in. Copy of the contract. We need to give a copy of anything that our clients signed to them, whether that's electronic or paper, doesn't really matter. But they need to have a copy of everything that they signed. Megan's Law, if the buyer is concerned about the presence of a registered sex offender, then they need to take steps to contact local law enforcement or look up the sex offender registry or whatever. It is not our duty. It is not our obligation to go tell them, hey, there's a sex offender that lives a couple doors down. Now, if you know that there's a sex offender that lives a couple doors down, is it okay to tell them? Yeah, and probably I wouldn't just flat out tell them. I would just say, hey, you guys should probably check the sex offender registry, right? And let them make their own decision. Okay. That's it. What questions do you guys have for me?
So Jesse, if you're looking at a property and you're considering putting a backup offer on it, and when you and your buyers are at the property, the first contract inspector happens to be there and he discloses a lot of information from his inspection, can you use that information when you're writing up your offer?
Yeah, why not? I mean, you could, if you know that the furnace needs to be replaced or whatever, you can put it into additional provisions and say, hey,
even though the seller has not got any kind of objection from the first contract in first position.
correct.
They don't know. Okay, I can still use that.
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, really, it's not your obligation to tell the seller, but certainly
Right.
if you're made aware of something, it's your obligation to tell the buyer.
Well,
Right.
they were there with me, so they.
Yeah. So
Okay.
they heard it too. Yeah. So totally okay. But most
Great.
inspectors, really, the inspector shouldn't be doing that because you're not his client and it's not his
Right.
position to tell you and you didn't pay for the
Exactly.
report. But if they were dumb enough to do that, then maybe the seller has a bone to pick with them.
Yep.
But that's not
Right.
my problem.
Right. Thanks.
Yep. Gary?
12.1, you leave blank.
Yes.
And then on 12.2, are you writing the limitations in there on just that short little line that's there or down below it?
Yeah, so right here is where I would just put like limited by seller showing instructions. That's what I put in my contract, right? This big blank right here is asking what multiple listing services do you have access to, right? So Iris, RE Colorado,
Okay,
you know, whatever else you have access to. That's what would go in this longer blank.
all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. What else? Okay, that's all I got. We'll do exclusive right to sell next week. We'll probably only take one class period just because there's so much overlap with the exclusive right to buy. So there's going to be a lot of similarities. We're not going to touch on every one of them again, but we will talk about the differences, some of the new stuff, right? The broker marketing piece, accessing property, that type of stuff. So we'll do that next week before we jump into the contract to buy and sell. I did have someone ask me if I could do a class where basically it's like my review of how I do it with a buyer or a seller. And so I'm happy to do that. And we can do it during this class. I'll tell you that I'm probably not as thorough as you guys think that I am, because I sit here and talk at you for 2 hours every week. I take 10 minutes to go over the contract to buy and sell with my clients, guys. So we can talk about it. We can chat. We can do that in class one day, but that's going to be a few weeks down the road.
So you're like the government, do as I say, not what I do. Is that how
Yeah.
that works?
Yes, please. Thank you. All right. That's all I got for you guys. Oh, Jim says, are we still doing with family reunion next week? That's a good point. And the answer is actually no. So next week we will not do contracts. Thanks, Jim. We'd already decided
Good
that.
catch.
So yeah, we'll resume the following week. So, okay.
Okay.
Hey, Jesse, thanks.
Jesse,
Yeah,
Thanks,
you bet.
Jesse.
Okay, we'll
Thank
see you
you.
guys.